The alien soldiers, elite warriors of the Empire, had landed on Earth brimming with confidence. Trained in the brutal art of warfare, they believed this mission, a simple display of dominance, would be no different from their countless previous victories. Humanity, they were told, was a species on the rise but still fragile and inexperienced in true interstellar conflict. So, with their commander's words echoing in their ears, they disembarked on a remote Deathworld to secure a human outpost, anticipating little resistance. As the battalion marched forward, their exoskeletons gleaming in the thick atmosphere, they couldn't shake an eerie feeling that grew with each step. The ground beneath their feet was soft and uneven, the air dense and humid, almost suffocating despite their advanced equipment. They dismissed these as mere inconveniences, side effects of a primitive planet. But the terrain seemed to resist them. Vines shifted subtly as they passed, as though alive. Strange, rhythmic sounds echoed in the distance, unidentifiable by any of their sensors. The commanders waved off concerns, ordering their troops to push forward. The first signs of danger came slowly. Shadows flickered just out of sight, and the alien soldiers began to feel watched. Instincts, honed through years of combat, stirred unease, but their training kept them moving forward. Then, without warning, the ground opened beneath their feet, revealing hidden pits lined with sharp stakes. Screams of pain echoed through the air as soldiers fell into the traps. Explosions followed, triggered by hidden mines buried under the brush, throwing the battalion into disarray. Their once orderly formation crumbled. The chaos was relentless. Human snipers, unseen and unheard, picked off soldiers one by one, firing from the dense forest and disappearing without a trace. The alien soldiers, used to direct confrontation, struggled to adapt to this guerrilla warfare. They returned fire blindly into the trees, but their targets were already gone. Communications flickered with static, and targeting systems failed, rendering their advanced weaponry almost useless. Panic began to spread through the ranks. Every step forward brought new dangers. The planet itself seemed to turn against them. Trees released clouds of toxic spores when disturbed. Fauna that had previously seemed curious became aggressive, attacking in coordinated waves. The commanders, now realizing the magnitude of their mistake, ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The path behind them was as treacherous as the one ahead. As the alien soldiers fought to survive, it dawned on them. They weren't just fighting humans. They were battling an entire ecosystem that had been weaponized by their enemy. Every trap, every ambush, every shift in the terrain had been meticulously planned. The humans had mastered this deadly world and turned it into their most powerful ally. The invaders' confidence, once their greatest strength, now eroded into fear. They were no longer the elite warriors they thought themselves to be, but prey, hunted and outmatched by an enemy they had grossly underestimated. The realization came too late. Their mission had already unraveled, and the nightmare had only just begun. As the darkness settled in, the cruel soldiers found themselves surrounded by an eerie silence that blanketed the alien forest. The once clear sounds of chirping fauna and shifting branches had given way to a quiet so thick it weighed on their minds. Their commanders, still attempting to project confidence, ordered their forces to set up camp for the night. But even as the soldiers followed orders, their nerves were frayed. The terrain, now lit only by the glow of their helmets and the dim light of their campfires, appeared even more hostile. The twisted trees, with their long grasping branches, seemed to close in further, their shapes casting grotesque shadows across the ground. Every movement, every shift in the underbrush, heightened the tension. Some of the younger soldiers, freshly trained and full of bravado when they landed, now gripped their weapons tighter, eyes darting at every whisper of wind or rustling leaf. The cruel commanders moved between their units, barking orders to stay vigilant, but even they couldn't shake the unease. The electromagnetic anomalies continued to interfere with their systems. Their targeting mechanisms flickered. Communications crackled with static, and their life support systems displayed errors they hadn't encountered before. It was as though the very planet itself was conspiring against them. But their orders were clear: take the human outpost and secure it for the Empire. Nothing else mattered. As the night dragged on, sleep was a distant dream. Many soldiers sat wide-eyed, their minds racing with thoughts of what lay in wait. The camp's perimeter sensors, designed to alert them of any incoming threats, remained eerily silent. But it wasn't because there was no danger. The humans, having observed the Cruel since their arrival, knew how to remain undetected. From the shadows, human scouts moved with practiced stealth, their bodies camouflaged to blend seamlessly into the forest. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were veterans of countless skirmishes, warriors who had fought not just on this world, but in hostile environments across the galaxy. Earth had prepared them well. Over the years, humanity had honed its ability to adapt, to blend into their surroundings, and to turn even the harshest of conditions to their advantage. The Cruel were just another enemy to outthink, outmaneuver, and ultimately outlast. The humans watched silently as the Cruel soldiers fidgeted and shifted. It was clear they were not used to this type of warfare. The Empire's elite forces thrived on direct confrontation, using overwhelming firepower and superior technology to crush their enemies. But this was different. The humans had no intention of fighting on the Cruel's terms. Instead, they would use the terrain, the environment, and the Cruel's own overconfidence against them. As the hours passed, the tension in the Cruel camp grew unbearable. Many soldiers reported seeing movement out of the corners of their eyes. Others swore they heard voices whispering just beyond the firelight. But every time they checked, there was nothing. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and the Cruel were beginning to crack under the pressure. Without warning, the first attack came. A distant explosion echoed through the forest, followed by another. The Cruel commanders shouted orders, but they were too slow. From every direction, small, precise blasts went off, designed not to destroy but to confuse and disorient. The Cruel soldiers scrambled, trying to locate the source of the explosions, but the humans had already moved on, vanishing into the trees before the Cruel could retaliate. The attacks were strategic. Every blast was followed by silence. No enemy soldiers to engage, no clear targets to fire upon. Just more shadows, more whispers, more tension. The Cruel's powerful weapons were useless if they had nothing to aim at. As panic set in, one Cruel squad broke formation, convinced they had spotted movement near the tree line. They rushed forward, weapons at the ready, but it was a trap. Hidden beneath the forest floor were human-made devices designed to disorient and disable. As the squad stepped on the hidden pressure plates, their weapons malfunctioned, their suits sparked, and their vision blurred. Before they could recover, they were hit by a barrage of human sniper fire. Silent and deadly, the shots took out the squad in seconds. The Cruel commanders, realizing the chaos was growing uncontrollable, ordered a full withdrawal from the area. But the humans had anticipated this too. The retreating Cruel soldiers found their paths blocked by the same terrain they had mocked earlier. Vines, seemingly harmless before, now wrapped around their legs, pulling them down into hidden pits. Branches twisted together, forming barriers that blocked their way. Even the small, agile creatures that had watched from afar now attacked with a viciousness that caught the Cruel off guard. The Cruel were fighting more than just human soldiers. They were fighting the planet itself. As the Cruel forces desperately tried to regroup, the human snipers continued their relentless assault, picking off soldiers one by one. The Cruel, despite their advanced technology and superior numbers, were losing to an enemy that they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. The night wore on, and the Cruel's casualties mounted. Their elite forces, once so confident in their victory, were now trapped in a nightmarish battle with an enemy that was always one step ahead. As dawn approached, the commanders made the difficult decision to call for reinforcements. They needed more soldiers, more firepower, if they were going to overcome the humans. But deep down, they knew that reinforcements alone might not be enough. This world was hostile in ways they hadn't anticipated. And the humans, with their lethal combat skills and intimate knowledge of the terrain, were proving to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The once unshakable confidence was now replaced by a growing sense of dread. They were trapped in a battle they hadn't prepared for, against an enemy they had underestimated, and as they awaited reinforcements, they knew that the worst was yet to come. The humans were just getting started. The morning sun rose slowly over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The light, though faint, was a welcome reprieve for the cruel forces, who had spent a night in terror, besieged by an unseen enemy. Their casualties were significant. Entire squads had vanished, consumed by the darkness and the deadly precision of human snipers. Every soldier who survived the night bore witness to the terrifying reality of the human resistance. This was not the easy victory the Empire had promised. Commander stood at the center of the camp, staring grimly at the field reports flooding in. His once pristine armor was now scuffed and stained, a physical testament to the chaos that had unfolded. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked across the holographic display projected in front of him. The Empire's reinforcements were en route, but they would not arrive for several hours. Until then, his forces were vulnerable. He clenched his fists in frustration. How had things spiraled so quickly? The humans were supposed to be an inferior species, their technology laughable compared to the Empire's. And yet, they had turned the battlefield into a nightmare. Every tactic they employed was met with cunning counterattacks, their technology rendered ineffective by simple yet brilliant human improvisations. It was as though the humans anticipated every move. Commander, one of his officers, approached cautiously, his voice low. The men are losing confidence. Last night, they were haunted by shadows, by ghosts. There are no ghosts, snapped. These humans are playing games, trying to unnerve us, but they are still just humans, flesh and blood. They can be killed. Hesitated, glancing at the display of the surrounding area. Perhaps, Commander, but we've lost many. They know this terrain far better than we anticipated. Every step we take is into another trap. Zeltha remained silent, his mind racing. The officer's words held truth, but admitting that would only further weaken morale. His soldiers had to believe they could still win, that the might of the Empire was unassailable. But deep down, knew that his forces were dangerously close to breaking. As mulled over his next move, a distant rumble reverberated through the camp. The ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly, growing stronger with each passing second. The soldiers tensed, raising their weapons instinctively, eyes darting to the tree line. "What now?" muttered under his breath, moving toward the edge of the camp. The rumbling grew louder, and from the depths of the forest, trees began to sway, bending unnaturally as something massive approached. The first to appear were human-made machines, vehicles unlike anything they had encountered. They were large, heavily armored, and bristling with an array of weapons. But these were not just machines of war. They were mobile fortresses, constructed with a mix of human ingenuity and adapted alien technology. They moved with a frightening precision. The lead vehicle, adorned with a massive insignia of Earth's military forces, came to a halt just within sight of the cruel camp. Before it could issue an order, a voice boomed from the machine, echoing across the forest. "Commander of the Cool Empire, this is Captain Sarah Reyes of the United Earth Forces. You've trespassed on our territory. You've attacked our people. This is your final warning. Leave this planet, or face total annihilation." Zelthar's blood boiled. The audacity of these humans to issue demands to the Empire. He stepped forward, his voice a low growl, laced with fury. "You speak of annihilation, Captain Reyes, but it is your people who will be crushed beneath the heel of the cruel Empire. Your resistance is futile. We will take this planet, and every human on it will either submit or perish." The comms were silent for a brief moment, and then Reyes responded, her tone unwavering. "You still don't understand, Commander. This isn't just another planet for you to conquer. This is Earth, and we don't give up. With that, the comms went dead, and the battle resumed. The cruel soldiers scrambled as the human war machines opened fire. Massive artillery rounds rained down on the cruel camp, each blast shaking the earth with a force that sent shockwaves through their ranks. Cruel plasma shields flickered to life, absorbing much of the initial barrage, but the humans' tactics were far more insidious. The artillery was only a diversion. From the sides of the battlefield, human strike teams emerged, their weapons locked and loaded. These soldiers were not like the snipers that had terrorized the cruel in the night. They were heavily armored, carrying advanced rifles and explosives designed to penetrate the cruel's defenses. They moved with deadly efficiency, using the terrain to their advantage, ducking behind trees and rocks as they closed in on the enemy. The cruel soldiers, already on edge from the night's psychological warfare, were slow to react. They fired wildly, their plasma blasts lighting up the forest. But the humans were too fast, too coordinated. Every volley of plasma was met with a hail of gunfire, and every missed shot only emboldened the human forces. Zelthar watched in disbelief as his soldiers faltered. This couldn't be happening. His elite forces were being cut down by a species they had considered inferior. "Commander," Rethak shouted over the din of battle, his voice filled with panic. "We're being overwhelmed. We need to retreat and regroup before." "There will be no retreat," Zelthar bellowed, his eyes blazing with anger. "Hold the line. We are the cruel empire. We do not run from." But before he could finish, a deafening explosion rocked the camp. One of the human machines had fired a missile that punched through the cruel's primary shield generator, sending debris flying in all directions. The shield collapsed, leaving the camp vulnerable to the full brunt of the human assault. For the first time since the battle began, Zelthar felt a sliver of fear creep into his heart. The human forces were relentless. Every time the cruel attempted to regroup, they were met with another wave of attacks. Grenades exploded among their ranks, disabling their equipment and leaving soldiers disoriented. Human drones, small and agile, zipped through the air, delivering precise strikes against key targets. Zelthar's mind raced. He had underestimated these humans. They were supposed to be primitive, weak, and unorganized. But this was a level of warfare he hadn't anticipated. Their technology, though not as advanced as the Empire's, was being used with a level of creativity and adaptability that made it far more dangerous than he had imagined. As the battle raged on, Zelthar's forces were pushed further and further back. The cruel, once the hunters, were now the hunted. Human snipers resumed their deadly work, picking off cruel officers and leaving the lower ranks in disarray. Panic spread through the camp like wildfire. But amidst the chaos, Zelthar's mind cleared. He had one final option, a desperate one, but it might be the only way to turn the tide. "Prepare the Voidbreakers," he shouted to his remaining officers. The Voidbreakers were the cruel's most devastating weapon. Experimental energy bombs designed to create localized black holes. They had been forbidden by the Galactic Council due to their destructive power, but Zelthar was beyond caring about politics or consequences now. Rithak hesitated. "But, Commander, if we use those..." "Do it," Zelthar roared. "We'll destroy them all, even if it means tearing this planet apart." The Voidbreakers were loaded into launchers, their ominous hum growing louder as they powered up. Zelthar's gamble was simple. If the humans wouldn't surrender, then they would all be annihilated together. As the weapons prepared to fire, a single human appeared on the battlefield, walking toward the cruel lines. It was Captain Rice, her helmet removed, her face calm and resolute. In her hand, she carried a small device. Zelthar sneered. "What is this?" A human attempt at negotiation. Rice stalked just within range of the cruel lines and held the device up. "You're out of time, Commander," she said. "The galaxy has seen what your empire is capable of, but they've also seen what we can do." Before Zelthar could respond, Rice activated the device. The ground beneath the cruel camp trembled, and a massive burst of energy erupted from the earth itself. The human forces had been hiding more than just soldiers and machines. They had rigged the entire area with powerful EMP mines designed to disable any electronic systems within miles. The void breakers powered down, their energy cores destabilized by the EMP. Zelfar's forces, already on the brink of collapse, were left completely defenseless. The battle was over. Zelfar's rage boiled over, but there was nothing he could do. His forces were decimated, his weapons disabled, and the humans had won. The battlefield fell eerily silent after the final blast. The once mighty cruel Empire forces now lay in ruins, their machinery flickering and dying under the weight of the human EMP strike. Smoke curled from the craters where artillery had hit, and broken cruel equipment littered the landscape like a graveyard of metal and shattered pride. Human soldiers cautiously advanced, their weapons raised and their senses sharp. There were no cheers, no cries of victory, only the grim understanding that the battle had been hard-fought, and the war was far from over. Captain Sarah Reyes stood at the forefront of her advancing soldiers, her eyes scanning the wreckage. Her face, though dirtied with soot and blood, held a quiet determination. She knew the gravity of the moment. This was the first true test of humanity's resistance against the cruel Empire, and they had not only survived, but had dealt a crushing blow to an enemy that had deemed them insignificant. Yet, she also knew that the battle they had won was just a fraction of the larger war looming ahead. Behind her, the massive mobile fortresses that had rolled in for the assault remained poised, their guns still trained on the cruel's broken lines. The victory, though decisive, left no room for complacency. Captain Reyes, a voice crackled in her earpiece. It was Major Daniels, her second-in-command, reporting from the rear command post. Scouts confirm all cruel forces have either been neutralized or are retreating further north. We've taken control of the area. Reyes exhaled slowly. Good, but we can't afford to let them regroup. Deploy recon teams to track their movements. I want eyes on them at all times. Daniel's voice held a note of hesitation. Are you sure we shouldn't take a moment to solidify our defenses here? The men are exhausted, and we've taken casualties. There's no time, Major, Reyes interrupted, her tone steely. The cruel Empire will strike back, and next time they won't underestimate us. We have to stay ahead of them. As she spoke, Reyes cast her gaze over the battlefield, where the medics were already tending to the wounded. The ground was dotted with human casualties as well, and she could feel the weight of every life lost on her shoulders. It was a cost she knew they would pay time and time again, if they wanted to keep Earth free from alien domination. But Reyes had no illusions about what was coming next. The cruel had learned a painful lesson today, but their revenge would be swift and brutal. She turned to her communications officer. Get me command. I need a secure line to General Taggart. A few moments later, the familiar gruff voice of General Taggart came through her comm. Reyes, I've just been briefed. Hell of a fight you put up. Yes, sir, but we can't let up. Reyes replied, her tone urgent. The cruel will be back with more reinforcements. We need air support, anti-orbital defenses, and more troops on the ground. The general was silent for a moment, considering. I understand, Captain, but we're stretched thin. You know that. We've got engagements on multiple fronts. I'll do what I can, but you'll need to hold your position until then. Reyes clenched her jaw. Understood, sir. We'll hold. As the connection ended, Reyes' mind raced. She had no illusions about what the next few days would bring. The cruel would return, likely in greater numbers and with heavier firepower. They couldn't afford to be caught unprepared. Daniels, she said into her comms again, rally the engineers and get them working on reinforcing our defenses. Use what's left of the cruel tech. If we can salvage anything, do it. And start setting up those anti-air guns we got from the southern bunkers. We'll need them soon. Aye, Captain, Daniels responded, already barking orders to the ground teams. The urgency in her tone spoke volumes. The remnants of the cruel forces had retreated, but they wouldn't stay away for long. They would return with more ships, more soldiers, and more weapons, and humanity had to be ready. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the cruel empire's command vessel, a war council was being held. Commander Xelthar, battered and humiliated by his defeat, stood before the Imperial High Command. His once polished armor was now dented and scarred, a testament to the brutality he had faced at the hands of the humans. Yet it was not the battlefield wounds that pained him the most, but the weight of his failure in the eyes of the Empire. The room was dimly lit, with the cold, sterile glow of holographic displays casting long shadows on the faces of the Empire's highest-ranking officers. Their alien features, sharp and severe, were fixed on Xelthar, their expressions unreadable, but their silence deafening. At the head of the table sat Lord Vekath, Supreme Commander of the cruel Imperial fleet. His eyes narrowed in judgment. His dark robes flowed over his chair, and his long, clawed fingers drummed against the table rhythmically, creating a tension that filled the room. "Commander Xelthar," Vekath began, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down the spines of those present. "Explain how a species as primitive as the humans managed to defeat an elite strike force of the Empire." Xelthar straightened, suppressing the growing anxiety gnawing at him. "My lord, the humans are more formidable than we initially believed. Their use of guerrilla tactics, coupled with an unexpected level of technological adaptation, allowed them to gain the upper hand. Enough." Vekath's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You failed. The might of the Empire was humbled by a race we deemed inferior. This cannot be allowed to stand." Xelthar bowed his head, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room upon him. "I take full responsibility, Lord Vekath. But I must insist, these humans are unlike any species we've encountered. Their resilience is extraordinary. They will not fall easily." The room fell into a heavy silence as Vekath considered Xelthar's words. His eyes flickered to a holographic display showing Earth, still stubbornly resisting the Empire's grip. "Then we will show them the full strength of the cruel Empire." Xelthar's heart raced. "My lord." "Send word to the 7th Fleet," Vekath ordered, his tone icy and final. "Earth will burn. We will crush their cities, annihilate their defenses, and erase their species from existence. This resistance ends now." Xelthar bowed low, his heart heavy with both relief and dread. The 7th Fleet was the most feared armada in the Empire, its destructive power unmatched. If they were to be unleashed on Earth, the planet would face devastation beyond anything the humans had seen. As he left the council chamber, Xelthar couldn't shake the unease settling over him. The humans had proven themselves to be cunning and resourceful, and he doubted they would simply lie down and accept annihilation. But with the 7th Fleet on the way, there would be little they could do to stop the onslaught. Back on Earth, Captain Rice stood before her troops. The battle had taken a toll, but her forces remained resolute. The cruel might have fled, but everyone knew they would return. And when they did, it wouldn't be with a small force. Rice could feel it in her bones. A storm was coming. Gathered in front of her were the soldiers who had fought alongside her in the brutal engagement. Men and women, some young and fresh-faced, others veterans scared by years of war. Their uniforms were dirty, their faces tired, but in their eyes was a fierce determination. "We've made our stand," Rice began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "And we've shown them that humanity won't be so easily conquered. But this war is far from over. They'll be back, and next time, they'll come with everything they've got." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every man, woman, and child on this planet. For our future, for humanity." Her eyes swept across the crowd. "We've already proven we can stand toe-to-toe with the cruel Empire. And when they come back, we'll be ready. We'll fight, and we'll win, because that's what we do. We adapt, we endure, and we overcome." The soldiers stood a little taller, their resolve hardening. Reyes knew the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The Cruel would throw everything at them, their ships, their weapons, their most ruthless tactics. But humanity had something more powerful than any of that. They had hope. And as long as they had that, they wouldn't be defeated. The air in the command center was thick with tension as Captain Sarah Reyes and her team reviewed the latest intelligence. Despite the temporary victory over the Cruel Empire's forces, the sense of foreboding had grown stronger with each passing hour. The Cruel's retreat wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a prelude to something much more dangerous. Satellite images showed the approach of the Seventh Fleet, one of the most feared armadas in the galaxy. Reyes stood at the head of the table, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of the incoming fleet. The massive ships, each bristling with weaponry, were like ominous shadows creeping across the screen. She glanced around the room at her officers, their faces grim and pale. "They'll be in orbit within 2 days," Reyes said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We don't have the firepower to match them ship for ship, but we do have something they don't." Major Daniels, standing to her right, frowned. "What do you mean, Captain?" "The Seventh Fleet is capable of leveling entire cities. We've barely scratched the surface of their forces, and we're running low on munitions." Reyes smiled faintly, a knowing look in her eyes. "What they don't have is our creativity. Humans are the most adaptable species in the galaxy, and they're about to find out just how dangerous that can be." She turned to Lieutenant Vargas, the team's intelligence officer. "Have we confirmed the locations of the underground bunkers in the Northern Territories?" Vargas nodded, tapping his tablet to bring up a new holographic display. "Yes, ma'am. We've located the old Cold War-era bunkers deep within the Arctic. They've been abandoned for decades, but they're still intact." Reyes' smile grew. "Then it's time to bring them back online. Those bunkers were built to survive a nuclear apocalypse. They're shielded from EMP attacks and have their own power supplies. We'll move our command structure there before the Cruel arrive." Daniel's eyes widened in realization. "You're planning on turning those bunkers into a last line of defense." "Exactly," Reyes said. "The Cruel won't expect us to fight from beneath the ice, and while they're focused on our surface defenses, we'll be coordinating from deep underground. If they want to wipe us out, they'll have to dig us out first." Vargas interjected, his voice cautious. "Captain, even with the bunkers, we're still vastly outnumbered. The Cruel could bombard the planet from orbit and wipe out our forces before we have a chance to retaliate." Reyes leaned forward, her expression hardening. "That's why we need to fight smarter, not harder. We've been working on something for years, something that's been kept off the books, a failsafe." The room fell silent, all eyes on Reyes. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Failsafe? What are you talking about?" Reyes straightened, tapping her own tablet to bring up a different set of schematics. The image that appeared on the screen was of a massive structure hidden deep within the Earth's crust, something that hadn't been discussed in any briefing before. "This," Reyes said, "is the Olympus Initiative." The officers leaned in, studying the hologram. It showed an enormous underground facility, kilometers beneath the surface, built with the utmost secrecy. The structure was filled with advanced weaponry, AI-controlled drones, and long-range missile systems that could strike targets in orbit. Vargas looked stunned. "This was built without any of us knowing." Reyes nodded. "Top secret. Only a handful of people knew about it. It was designed as a last-ditch effort in case of an extinction-level threat. Something that could strike back against an overwhelming enemy force without them ever knowing where we were." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "You're telling me we've had this the whole time?" Reyes' expression softened. "It was never meant to be used unless absolutely necessary. But if the Seventh Fleet reaches Earth, we'll have no choice." Vargas studied the schematics closely. "This could give us a real chance, Captain. But how are we going to activate it in time? The Seventh Fleet will be here in 2 days. Is it even operational?" "It is," Reyes said confidently. I've been coordinating with a few of our top engineers, and they've confirmed that everything is in place. All we need to do is get the command codes to the central core, and the entire system will come online. Daniels exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation sinking in. If this works, we might just survive the next assault. Reyes nodded. But we'll need to act fast. Get your teams ready. We moved to the northern bunkers immediately. The icy wind howled across the Arctic tundra as the convoy of military transports rumbled through the frozen wasteland. The sky was dark, with only the faintest glimmer of stars visible through the thick cloud cover. Snow whipped against the windows of the armored vehicles, obscuring the view of the towering mountains in the distance. Inside the lead transport, Reyes sat with her team, her face illuminated by the dim red glow of the cabin lights. Daniels checked his tablet again, confirming their coordinates. We're almost there, Captain. The entrance to the bunkers should be just ahead. Reyes nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. The cold had seeped into everything, but she barely felt it. Her mind was focused on the task ahead. They had to reach the bunkers before the 7th Fleet arrived. Once the Cruel were in orbit, the real fight would begin. The convoy slowed as they approached the hidden entrance to the underground facility. Massive steel doors, long unused, were covered in a thick layer of ice and snow. Engineers quickly set to work, using heavy machinery to clear the entrance and activate the ancient mechanisms that would open the doors. After several tense minutes, the doors groaned and began to slide open, revealing a dark tunnel leading deep into the earth. Reyes gave the order to proceed, and the convoy descended into the depths of the Arctic. The interior of the bunker was just as cold and lifeless as the tundra above. Dust covered the floors, and the walls were lined with outdated control panels and equipment. But despite its age, the facility was still functional. Reyes and her team quickly set up a temporary command center in the bunker's main control room. Engineers worked around the clock to bring the systems back online, while soldiers secured the perimeter and prepared for the inevitable Cruel assault. Reyes stood at the center of the room, overseeing the activity. "We have less than 48 hours before the 7th Fleet arrives," she said, her voice cutting through the bustle. "We need to be ready." "Vargas, what's the status of the Olympus initiative?" Vargas, his fingers flying over his tablet, replied without looking up. "We're uploading the command codes now, Captain. The system should be operational within the next few hours." "Good," Reyes said, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the map of the incoming fleet. "Because when the Cruel arrive, they're going to be in for a surprise." 2 days later, the Cruel 7th Fleet descended upon Earth, their ships blotting out the sky like a swarm of locusts. From orbit, the fleet's massive warships fired upon the planet below, targeting human cities and military installations with ruthless precision. The ground trembled as the bombardment began, and the sky was lit with the fiery trails of missiles and energy blasts. But the Cruel, for all their technological superiority, had underestimated humanity once again. As the bombardment rained down on the surface, the Olympus initiative came online. Deep beneath the Earth, hidden from the Cruel sensors, the advanced weapon systems roared to life. Automated defense systems locked onto the Cruel ships, launching waves of drones and long-range missiles into the atmosphere. The Cruel, unprepared for such a coordinated response, scrambled to react. But it was too late. The missiles struck the Cruel fleet with devastating force, tearing through their shields and obliterating their ships one by one. Explosions lit up the night sky as the fleet began to fall apart, their once impenetrable armada now in disarray. From the bunkers below, Reyes and her team watched the battle unfold on their screens. Cheers erupted as ship after ship was destroyed, but Reyes remained calm, her eyes focused on the larger picture. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steady. "The Cruel will send reinforcements. We've won this round, but the war is far from finished." Daniel stood beside her, his face a mix of relief and determination. "What do we do now, Captain?" Reyes smiled grimly. "We keep fighting. We show them the humanity won't go down without a fight. and we make sure that every time they come for us, they pay for it. Humanity had survived the first major assault, but the war was only beginning. As the dust settled, Rise knew that the battle for Earth, and for humanity's future, was far from over. But as long as they had the Olympus Initiative, they had a fighting chance.